Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As more people are logging in, I just want to quickly introduce myself. My name is Miriam Mendoza, and I am the International Affairs Coordinator at the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to today's International Business Affairs Forum. I'm very excited for today's forum, and to get us started, I would like to introduce you to Lalo Acosta, the IBA Chair and Vice President of R.L. Jones Custom House Brokers. So Lalo, please go ahead and take it for us.
Thank you very much, Miriam, and good morning, everybody. It's great to have you here on this forum today. We are exactly 10 days away from the most historical election in Mexico, with over 140 positions up for election, including 128 senatorial seats, 7 governorships, single local congressional seats in 4 states, and very likely the first ever woman president in Mexico. That just alone makes for an exciting election. For the past month and a half, we have witnessed 3 presidential debates ranging in a variety of issues, and potentially and with unique reasons, with a very unique variety of reasons. For the first time, viewers that could opt to stream in indigenous languages, and Mexican expats had the opportunity to participate in questions that were asked during these debates. This is a high importance, as 12.12 million Mexicans reside abroad, most of them residing in the U.S. All expats will get the opportunity to vote in person in the 23 consulates, including the Mexican consulate in San Diego. Today's forum will focus on Mexico's presidential election and the potential impacts on U.S.-Mexico relations. I know at the International Business Affairs Forum here, we're very excited to hear about this, since this is something that is very dear and near to our hearts. Today's forum will focus on Mexico's presidential election and the 3 presidential candidates that will appear on the ballot this upcoming June 2nd. First will be Claudia Sheinbaum, the former governor of Mexico City, and with the coalition Sigamos Haciendo Historia, or Let's Continue to Make History Together, or Morena, the Partido del Trabajo, and Partido Verde. Second candidate will be Xochitl Gálvez, former mayor of the Miguel Hidalgo delegation in Mexico City, and former senator with the PAN party, representing the Fuerza y Corazón por México coalition, or Strength and Heart for Mexico, composed by the PAN, the old PRI, Partido Revolucionario Institucional, and PRD, Partido de la Revolución Democrática. Lastly, the third candidate will be on the ballot will be Jorge Álvarez Maínez, former deputy of the Congress for the state of Zacatecas with Movimiento Ciudadano. With Mexico now as the U.S. top trading partner, it is vital to understand the changing political dynamics and how it might affect bilateral ties. I'm proud to welcome our panel of experts joining us today to share their insight on the presidential elections and have a conversation with all of you on the U.S.-Mexico relationship. First up today, I'll name the 3, and then I'll introduce them one by one. First, we will have Ciro Murayama. He is a visiting scholar at the Center for Mexico-U.S. Studies at the University of California, San Diego, UCSD, and a full-time professor at the economic faculty at the National Autonomo University of Mexico. Ciro was electoral counselor on the National Electoral Institute of Mexico from 2014 to 2023. Alejandra Helfgut is an analyst at the Office of Strategies at the Wilson Center and leads Mexico's Institute Election Guide, the ultimate resource for English-speaking audiences on Mexican politics and the current election cycle. Thirdly, we will have Sofia Ramirez, who serves as director of Mexico Como Vamos, a nonprofit organization generating research to better evaluate the country's performance on a variety of economic markers. Formerly an assessor for INE's preliminary electoral results at the local and federal level. To get this started, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Ciro. Ciro, please tell us a little bit of the history of the elections in Mexico. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much for the presentation and also for the invitation. I'm glad to be here this morning, sharing the panel with people that I really respect in their work. Let's start if talking about the numbers of the election. Mexico has had in the last 3 decades an electoral system with a good reputation of integrity. And now we are going to be in the biggest election of the history for 2 reasons. One, and if we can see the next slide, is for the number of potential voters. We have almost 100 million of voters, 9 million more than the last presidential election in 2018, and 27% of the electoral census are young people. So we are going to have the biggest election for the number of electors, but also for the number of public positions that the Mexicans are going to vote in 2 Sundays. Please, the next slide. You can see there are more than 20,000 of electoral positions. There will be 3 federal elections, the presidency of the Republic, and 2 chambers of the Congress, the Senate and the federal deputies. And also, we are going to have elections for governors in 9 states: Chiapas, Mexico City, Guanajuato, Jalisco, Morelos, Puebla, Tabasco, Veracruz, and Yucatan. In 31 states, the congresses will be renovated at all. The exception is Coahuila. And in 30 states also are going to change all the mayors. So this is the biggest election. The map of political representation in Mexico will change in less than 2 weeks. The next slide, please. And as I was telling you, the Mexican electoral system is very strong in its capability to respect the vote. Is quite different from the Mexico in the 20th century. Now we have an independent body, the National Electoral Institute, that has a permanent structure, is a body with a civil career. So the people that work at the INE is not looking for who wins or who lost the elections. They will be in their jobs, and it's a guarantee of independence and impartiality. And also, the INE invite a lot of citizens to be part of its structure during the electoral process. In each state, the INE has a local council with 6 independent people that have vote to take the decision, and this structure is also in 300 district councils, and they are in charge of the installation of the poll stations. We are going to have 107,000 poll stations in June 2. And I want to talk about the presidency and the Congress, the federal elections, in 2 minutes. Next, please. Since 2000, in the 4 presidential elections that Mexico has had in this century, we have had 3 alternations in the presidency. With Vicente Fox, after 7 decades of pre-government, we start the century with the first political transition, and in 2012, the second alternation with the return of the PRI to the presidency with Peña Nieto after Felipe Calderón, and in the last election in 2018, López Obrador won the election. So we have 3 different political parties in the presidency of Mexico, and it means that an index of alternation of 75% is very high. And we are waiting for the next result. But the future will depend not just of the results of the presidential election, but the composition of the Congress is very important. And next, please, the deputy chamber in Mexico is formed by 500 deputies. 300 are elected in 300 districts, and 2,000 by proportional representation. So it's very difficult that just one political party or one coalition wins the majority with enough votes to change the constitution. That needs 2/3 parts of the Congress. Is very difficult, and they will have to negotiate to change the constitution. Is a mechanism to ensure the consensus. And the Senate, the next one, please, is formed by 128 members, 96 elected in the 32 states. So in each state has 3 senators, 2 for the first place, the political party or coalition that has more votes, and 1 for the second place. So every state is represented by 2 different political forces. And there are also 32 senators of the national list. To have the enough votes to change the constitution, it's necessary to have 86 senators. It's impossible, almost impossible, that any political force or coalition could be with that amount of senators. Why? Because if one political party or coalition, supposed, wins all the country, it means 64 senators, but needs 22 more to have 86, the magic number to change the constitution. But to be able to get 22 senators for the national list, the political party or coalition needs 68% of the votation. It's impossible. In the last presidential election, with a very strong candidate as López Obrador, Morena and its political parties in alliance obtained 44% of the votes to the Senate. So I think Mexico will face a next government with check and balance from the Congress. I hope that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ciro. And with such a historic election, it's great to hear that the INE is prepared for a democratic vote for this transition. So we're excited about that. Thank you very much. Next, we will have Alejandra Helfgott on talking to us a little bit about polls and the candidates. Alejandra?
Thank you very much, Lolo, and thank you for the invitation to be here. I want to start off my presentation looking at the polls. So here you can see what is called the poll of the polls. This is done by Oraculus, and it's an aggregated poll of nationwide surveys and polls on voter preference for the presidential candidates from July up until present. I really like this poll because it shows the full spectrum from now up until about a year ago, rather than most surveys, which just are kind of capturing a moment in time. Here you can really see the trajectory of the popularity of the candidates, with the range, of course, among the different surveys. But what really stands out in this poll here is Claudia's lead. It's consistent and it's sustained. It's substantial compared to that of her competitors. 20 percentage points above Xochitl Galvez, and then 40 points above Maynes. If we could please switch to the next slide. I want to give some context before we jump into the platforms of the candidates. As we heard previously, there are these alliances and coalitions. So there are 3 candidates running for the election, but there are actually 7 political parties at play here. And it's important to understand that in Mexican politics, party identification is not necessarily as significant or as telling as in other contexts. So for example, in the United States, if we have a candidate who is a conservative Republican from the South, we have an idea about how that person might vote on issues like abortion, taxes, migration, things like that. But in the context of Mexico, if you say I have a candidate, from Southern Mexico who's from the PRI, you don't really have an idea about how that candidate might vote on certain issues because these parties encompass wide ranges of ideology. It's also very common for candidates or politicians to change party affiliation. And so these alliances are not necessarily tied to specific ideology per se, but rather political convenience and where it makes most sense for the parties to compete together. And that is important because we need to take that into consideration when looking at the candidates' platforms. There had to be compromise on these platforms because there are 3 different parties with the 2 alliances. And a clear example that I just want to touch on that kind of highlights why party identification isn't necessarily that telling in Mexico is with the PRD. So the PRD emerged in the late 1980s out of the left wing of the PRI. It is considered the forerunner, the predecessor to the modern party of Morena. AMLO was one of the very first members of the PRD. Sheinbaum was also a member of the PRD, and now, of course, they're members of Morena, and the PRD is competing against Morena in this election. So that's a clear example of how party affiliation doesn't necessarily actually mean that much, and it's important to consider and keep in mind when we look at the actual candidates' platforms. I want to make one comment before we actually talk about the content of the platforms, and that is with Claudia Sheinbaum's platform. If you take away anything from my comments, I hope it's the following. Her platform policy proposals are entitled 100 Pasos para la Cuarta Transformación, la Tercera Versión. So 100 steps for the 4th transformation, the 3rd version. We know that AMLO considers Morena the 4th transformation, the first 3 being independence, the Reformation, and the revolution. The 4th is Morena. So Claudia is continuing that And her platform is called the third version. Why? The first two versions were when AMLO ran for president in 2006 and 2018. So when people wonder what will become of Morena, what will a presidency under Sheinbaum look like, she is explicitly telling us in her party platform on the very first page, the title page, that this presidency will be a continuation of what Morena has already put into place. If we could please skip to the next slide. So I've identified three key party platform areas: economy, security, justice, rule of law, and then foreign policy. But if you're interested in learning more information about the candidates' platforms in more detail and in English, please visit the Wilson Center's Mexico Institute 2024 Elections Guide, and you'll find a full list of the different candidate platforms. So in terms of economy, all three candidates support the continuation of the existing social programs that were put into place by Morena. All candidates have been very adamant that those programs will continue in place even if there's a change in government. Looking specifically at Sheinbaum, she has promised to make Republican austerity an official state policy. We know, of course, that has been an important factor during the AMLO administration, but it has not been an official capacity whatsoever. But she has promised in her platform to make it an official state policy. Xochitl Galvez has more of a focus on regional sustainable growth and development, specifically with small and medium businesses. And she proposes the redesign of industrial policy in Mexico to really focus on supporting these smaller businesses. Maynes takes an interesting approach. Rather than zooming out, he kind of zooms in more so on policies that are impacting individuals, so promising affordable housing and addressing the housing deficit in Mexico, ensuring fair wages, and then promising scholarships for high school and university students. If we could go to the next slide, please. Sheinbaum's platform, she promises to increase and expand the power of the National Guard, which is something that we saw very much under the AMLO administration. She hopes to expand the power. Additionally, she proposes a reform to Mexico's judicial system, including the direct election of members of the Supreme Court, district judges, and magistrates. That is a project that AMLO began, was not successful, but she has promised in her platform to continue that project moving forward. Both Galvez and Maynes want to remove the National Guard from civilian activities and tasks and reorient and redirect their efforts towards fighting organized crime in Mexico and ensuring security on that front. Both support the end of pretrial detention in Mexico, as well as the professionalization of Mexico's police force, ensuring proper training and sustainable fair wages for Mexico's police force. Of note, Galvez explicitly says she plans to end the current administration's policy of hugs, not bullets. And she proposes the increase of numbers of National Guard from 150,000 to 300,000. And then Maynes, he has some interesting policy proposals in terms of security, such as giving police investigative capacities, using a transitional justice model, and then also the legalization of certain drugs. And finally, the last slide, please. Foreign policy. So all three candidates mention strengthening Mexico's international leadership. We know under Sheinbaum, it's probably going to be more or less the same as the current situation, Mexico first approach. Both Galvez and Maynes mention support for policies that encourage nearshoring. There's specific mention of nearshoring in both of their platforms. Galvez is the only candidate who mentions the USMCA review. She promises that her administration will participate in this review, and then she also proposes growing Mexico's commercial alliances. Maynes also proposes growing Mexico's commercial alliances, but more so focusing on other trade relationships. He explicitly says focusing on the trade deals that Mexico has with 12 other countries rather than continuing Mexico's trade dependence on the United States. These platforms are so extensive, we could spend the rest of the day talking about them, but this is just a little glimpse. Please, like I said before, visit the Wilson Center's Mexico Institute Elections Guide, and you'll find more information about these candidates' platforms there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alejandra. And as the polls show, I think it's very likely that we will be electing the first female president in Mexico. Thank you. And in addition, it's funny because we also have three parties, the PRI, the PRD, and the PAN, who are working as an alliance. Who would have thought before 2018 that these three adversaries would have been working together? You just never know how things have changed. Thank you. Okay, moving on. Sophia, can you please elaborate on the economic indicators of the past three presidents, López Obrador, Peña Nieto and Felipe Calderon, so that we can get a broader perspective of Mexico's economy for the last 18 years under such very different political parties. Thank you, Sofia, and welcome.
Thank you, Lalo. This is my team. I just wanted to show you how young people can actually elaborate on complex economic data. But we also talked to the young public in Mexico. So regarding the question Lalo just made, how Mexican economy is just doing, I just wanted to show that the previous administration, like the two previous administration until 2018, before Andrés Manuel López Obrador joined the government, well, we had an average annual growth of 2.3%. And then in 2018, when López Obrador won the federal election for the presidency, the investments got a little bit of cold feet, stopped the investment flow, and then we had this very cold year in 2019 in economic terms, which means that we didn't grow a bit. We actually had a small contraction of 0.2% in that first year of the López Obrador term. And then the COVID pandemic, of course, had this big contraction of our economy that even though it jumped back in 2021, it wasn't enough to get back to where we were before the pandemic. And then in 2022 and 2023, as you may see, we have this slowdown in growth. Today, we had the update of how the annual growth rate in the first trimester, how do you say, quarter, was 1.9. We don't have analyzed data. We just compare this against the first quarter of 2023. And as you may see, the growth and the recuperation has slowed down. We are already 5.6% above the pre-pandemic level, and 4.3 above the last peak. Remember, please, that the last peak was in 2018, not in 2019 before the pandemic. So the economic growth of Mexico was already lagging before the pandemic, but we haven't had the enough dynamics of growth so that we can just jump back to where we were in terms of per capita GDP. If you compare the whole administration for the past 2, 4, 6, 7 administrations, you may see that this calculus made by Grupo Financiero Base, not by Mexico Como Vamos, we may have the slowest accumulated growth of the Mexican GDP. Of course, we know that there was this pandemic going through the last couple of years. But if you think over here, you may say that we had the big contraction of 2008 and 2009 during the Felipe Calderon's administration. So every administration has a problem and a particular set of conditions. And therefore, we have the expectation that as we see how the administration of López Obrador is closing, we don't as big, we haven't had the enough growth so that our GDP per capita is still below, by the end of the administration, of what we had before AMLO started. So this is how investment looks like. Although the first year of administration, the investment didn't flow as expected. All in all, in the last 5 years, we have seen that investment has already went back to where we were during the Felipe Calderon's administration, pretty much at the same pace as back then, even though we had a lot of the structural reforms happening in Enrique Peña Nieto's administration. So therefore, this is an important insight then that they might be a lot of noise regarding how things during the AMLO administration went. But the truth is, investment has come back to a pace we hadn't seen in a while. So if you analyze the total Mexican investment as percentage of the GDP, you may see that we are heading pretty much one fourth of our economy is what is equivalent to the investment. And I think most importantly is that almost 90% of Mexican investment is private investment, which means that even though we have a lot of opportunities and of course a lot of challenges regarding security, corruption, impunity, the investments keep flowing on the one hand, and on the other hand, all who are being asked regarding the financial system, if it is a good moment or a bad moment for companies to make investment, you may see that there is a lot of responses in a good sense, in an optimistic sense, that it is a good moment to do so. Of course, there is a lot of people who say that they don't know, but I think in the aggregate, this is good news, because at the very end, you may see that in the aftermath of the pandemic, the nearshoring became a reality, not probably in the terms we were expecting and not in the size we were expecting, but it is here. And this is why the relocation of global supply chains are coming to Mexico. And this regionalization, of course, isn't happening just because there is a war, trade war with China, but because we have been working together for the last almost 40 years. You have to remember that before the NAFTA agreement, we had the GATT agreement signed, as well as Mexicans in the 80s. And therefore, this story of compenetration, of integration, of permanent commercial exchange is not something that happened just with a USMCA or with a NAFTA. It happened a long time before that. And this is where we are now, where Mexico is the first trade partner of the US, has been for a while. I mean, the first trimester of every year, it isn't something rare that we are at the top of the list because of all the fruits and vegetables we trade with the US. But what is new is that Mexico has been 5 trimesters at the very top of the list of main trading partners of the US. And coming a little bit back to where we are in Mexico, well, of course, for the people, it's all about the labor market, and there are challenges that haven't been addressed for forever, and need to be addressed in the coming years, because otherwise productivity and integration may not be what could have been if things were done differently. So in terms of the generation of formal jobs, the almost 5.5 years we've been counting of the administrations, of all the 4 previous administrations, we see that under AMLO's administration, we are par with Felipe Calderon's. And of course, if we add up the 800,000 jobs that are missing from the pandemic, we are still below the number of jobs that were created during the last administration. Labor informality is a big problem in Mexico, because more than half of the population has a job in which there is no social security, but there is also no education or savings accounts, or you don't even get paid through the bank or a check. You get paid in cash, and you don't have access to social security of any kind. So therefore, you may see that even though the trajectory is downwards, it isn't still a problem we have addressed properly, because nobody's doing anything to set things straight in the other way, in the correct path. Another one of the biggest problems of the Mexican labor market is actually equality among men and women. If you see how the labor participation of men it is quite high. It might be even too high, and there are many men who should be either studying or resting who are actually working, and this is because a lot of women aren't working. It doesn't mean that they are at home doing yoga. They are at home doing chores, and of course those are being paid. And pretty much the same problems that face the US in terms of childcare is what we face in Mexico. But if there are some calculus of the World Bank that says that if we could have a similar participation of men and women in the paid labor market, our GDP could be up to 20 to 22% bigger than it is actually or currently. The income in the Mexican households has primarily grown for all income levels. This hasn't shown for the top 10% of income households, but there are always troubles, like getting to the people with the most income in every country, not only in Mexico, because you don't get to talk to them. You get to the person who is watching the door and not, like the person who's actually living within the house. So even if we take out the richest 10% of our income distribution, as you may appreciate, you may see that we have this very big jump in income between the top 10% income group than any other group, and mostly all other income levels have been watching an increase in their labor income, which is great because 7 out of 10 pesos in Mexican households come from the labor they do as a household, not from transfers, not from remittances, nothing else. So labor productivity, even though we have been experiencing or seeing or watching or even registering a lot of investment, went back to where we were before the pandemic, which was over here. We are still pretty much in the levels of 2009. And this might be because we have a delay in how productivity increases after a couple of years of the right investments, which is another issue, because at least what goes under the public sector investment doesn't necessarily translate itself into more productivity or growth in the coming years. So labor poverty is the last of the issues I want to address in this first round, which is 37% of the population. We are pretty much on the lowest levels if you measure it through the percentage of the population. But as you may see, we are speaking out of 48 million people who live in households in which they don't have enough labor income, to buy enough food for all the people who live within that household. There is a big discussion in Mexico whether this is overestimated, but since every year it is measured the same way, every trimester actually, we pretty much stick to the measure, and we know we have a big path to go before we minimize it to satisfactory levels of labor poverty. And finally, consumer confidence. Consumer confidence, since Andrés Manuel López Obrador won the election, has went up, and this has little to do or less to do with household income and more to an optimistic point of view of how things are going to go with the current administration. What is happening right now is that people are losing a little bit of the optimistic view on the future, the coming future of the country's economy. But this is more like something that we can expect when we don't have a very, charismatic leader as we had in 2018 when Andrés Manuel López Obrador won. I could keep going, but I know my time is up. I'd rather wait for the questions after this.
Sophia, thank you very much. That was great information. And, with over $70 billion worth of annual trade and over 150 border crossers in our region daily, it is vital that the presidential candidates prioritize diplomatic, economic, academic, and political ties between both our countries. Okay, what we're going to do next is I'm going to ask the panelists 3 questions, and they can either one of you guys can answer them. And at the same time, I want to encourage all of you that are listening, if you can write into the chat, add your questions, and we'll get to them afterwards. So for our 3 panelists, I'd like to ask you, the first question would be, based on the political debates and overall campaigns, what are the candidates' views on bilateral issues, and how does each plan to tackle them? Any of you, please welcome. Thank you.
Well, I'll start us off. Specifically looking at two, I mean, obviously there are a lot of important issues in the bilateral relationship, but two that really come to mind are security and trade. In the security situation, both Sheinbaum and Galvez have proposed binational working groups to address the security situation, and also a North American Customs Agency, which combines the two issues of security and trade. It's interesting because with Galvez's platform, she says, let's strengthen trade with the United States, participate in the USMCA review. Maynes also says, let's improve and strengthen trade in Mexico, but he wants to do it with other partner countries, not necessarily the United States. He explicitly focuses on these 12 other trade agreements that Mexico has, not with the United States. So it's interesting to see that kind of departure. And under a Morena presidency, I imagine that we'll just see kind of more or less the same of what we're seeing now, a Mexico first approach when it comes to trade in the bilateral relationship.
Yes, Ciro, adelante.
Thank you. I think the most important difference between the candidates is that, as President López Obrador is doing, Claudia Sheinbaum has not the capability or the disposition even to recognize the profundity of the problems in Mexico. For example, the violence, the criminality levels, and how you can confront the problems if you are denying the problems. Also, with migration, she's telling that the migration is going down, but it's not going down. The last number of INEGI, the statistical body in Mexico, shows that the migration is growing up in the last 5 years with López Obrador, and is a different migration. It's not just people looking for better jobs or for better income. It's people running away from the violence and the power of the cartels. I think this is the main difference. We don't know if Xochitl wins, if she will have the power to confront the violence, but at least she recognized that there is a problem. Claudia is denying the problem. I think it is the big difference between them.
Thank you very much, Ciro. And I think a lot of people would probably agree with your analysis there. Thank you for that. And I'll jump into the next question here. How is voter participation in Mexico's presidential elections shaping up? How does this election differ from previous elections in terms of participation and demographics?
Well, may I say something regarding that
Please.
question? Okay, so on the one hand, in terms of demographics, we have in Mexico this higher participation of women, and women are both having less labor income in pretty much every state, and also women are the ones who are living more in labor poverty. I believe having the first female president doesn't directly mean that women are doing better or will be doing better in the next coming years. But I also believe that you may see an increase in how solo women are, migrating to the US or migrating within the country for labor purposes, for job purposes. And I believe this makes a big shift in terms of how the demographics will look like, because as Ciro said, we're going to face a bigger pressure of people heading to the north of the continent, and Mexico is part of the northern part of the continent. So we have a decreasing domestic population in all three countries, in the US, Canada, and Mexico, and a bigger increase in migration for labor purposes or economic purposes. So therefore, we must be watching how much we spend in migration. And I believe in Mexico, we have this very poor view of how we spend the money for migration, because usually we think of Mexico as a country which sends the people to the US. But right now, even though there are more women than before migrant to the US, we might be want to look at how we spend the money within the country. And for the last, I don't know, like a couple of administrations, Mexico has been assigning a small budget, which is at least 1/3 of what Mexico actually ends up spending in terms of migration and regulation of the labor which comes within the country. And of course, if you don't have the plan on how you're going to spend the money, particularly regarding migration, you may see a problem, because even though you end up spending 3 more times the amount you actually thought you were going to spend, you are doing it wrongly. And pretty much this happens in a lot of issues. And I believe the other one that is complicated is the security issue, because even though the military is out there and probably they should be looking for national security or national safety issues, they're pretty much just the ones who are resolving also the public safety issues, and they are doing it in the wrong way. So I believe not having a different strategy of what we watched that didn't work out for the last couple of administrations, of just keeping the military out in the country and out in the road and in the street and you know, like interacting with people, will not have better results than we already seen. So I believe one of the biggest opportunities of the country is actually to assign the money in a better way, which leads me to the one last issue I want to address, which is that probably Mexico will face the need of spending cutoff of all the, you know, like the issues that might lead to a better prosperity or a bigger prosperity, which is public safety, health care, and education, because those are the, you know, budgets that you can transform into a different planification, or you think you might spend it in a different way. And all other spending, you know, like the emergencies or climate change or security threats or whatsoever, even thinking of migration as part of this, will be, you know, like money they will need to cut out of those other 3 important and basic issues, which are health, education, and security or safety, public safety, for the country to have enough money to attend those, you know, urgent issues. So, you know, like the public finances are pretty much one of the biggest challenges we're facing right now.
Thank you. Ciro, Alejandra, yeah, you want to answer about these elections and how they're shaping up and how they compare to the previous ones? Go ahead.
Yes, I just want to make a comment on migration. I would be remiss if I didn't mention this. Maynes has proposed the decriminalization and demilitarization of migration in Mexico, and has proposed the elimination of migration checks within Mexico. So I want to put that on the table, since there's been a lot of talk about migration recently with Sophia's comments. But in terms of voter participation for this election, I really want to draw attention to the youth vote, specifically those voters who are aged between 18 and 34 years old. This population represents 37% of Mexico's eligible voting population. I mean, that's absolutely significant, and I think significant attention needs to be paid toward that population. You see a lot of attention toward that population with Movimiento Ciudadano's platforms and campaign PR efforts, but as analysts, I think more attention needs to be paid to that population. Additionally, just a few weeks ago, Mexico hosted the Simulacro Electoral Universitario, in which over 250,000 Mexican university and college students participated in mock elections for the presidency. And that is an effort to drum up support for democracy in Mexico and encouraging students to really get out the vote. So it'll be interesting to see how this population turns out in on actual voting day. Of note, in this election, mock election, Sheinbaum came out first, Maynes came out second, and then Xochitl Galvez third. So if this population comes out and votes on election day, perhaps that will make some sway in the final outcome. I don't think Maynes will jump to second place, but perhaps he'll do better in the actual election day results compared to these national surveys that show him just polling third place.
Thank you. And Cito, if you want anything else, I can just go on to the next question. And Medium, I guess, if in the meantime, if you can just start prepping the questions that we're getting from the audience. Thank you. Okay, next question. What should the next president of Mexico prioritize in terms of economic growth and business development? And how will these priorities be impacted by the upcoming presidential elections in the United States? Considering that we already know, we have already worked with Trump and Biden, and we know both their styles. So who would like to take a stab at that one? Cito?
Yes, there is a big weakness of Mexican economy, and is its very low ability or capability to get income tax money. Mexico is in Latin America one of the countries with less taxes. It's around 15% of the GDP. You are not able to invest enough to finance the education, health needs, infrastructure projects with that level of taxes. So the candidates, 3 of them, are not talking about the tax reform. They are avoiding, but there is an elephant in the room, the need of money for the Mexican state. And they will have to see that reality is not popular, but there is a need. And the other thing, everybody is waiting for the nearshoring, for the external investment, and for the promise of growth. But we have already a problem with the energy supply in Mexico. The investment in energy has been going down in the last years, and if the factories are going to the north of Mexico, there is not enough energy to work. So we need to increase to face a bearing. We need increase the investment in the generation of electricity, and as we know, López Obrador has been rejected the external investment in this field, in this issue. So I think there are 2 problems: the infrastructure in energy and the need of a tax reform. Thank you.
Thank you.
Along the line,
go ahead.
I just want to add,
thank you.
Add a comment. Along the lines of needed investment in energy, there's also needed attention towards water and water scarcity in Mexico. If you do not have available water resources, not only for Mexico's population, but then these businesses as well, business is not going to come to Mexico. And that is not an overnight quick problem that we can find a quick solution. There needs to be significant, substantial, long-term investment in this issue. And in terms of the bilateral relationship looking forward past these 2024 elections, we see increasing geopolitical competition, perhaps even more so than the last time the US and Mexican elections overlapped. And so I think this is just another opportunity for North America to come together as a bloc and unite. It cannot just be Mexico going alone, the United States going alone. The countries are stronger when they work together, and bringing in Canada. And I just want to really reiterate that point, that I hope these candidates moving forward into the presidency past the 2024 election really really commit to working together as a bloc, a regional bloc.
I would like to add
Thank-
something, Lalo, if it's possible.
Yes,
Oh,
Sophia,
sorry.
please go ahead.
Thank you. So I believe both my colleagues are right. I think the possibility of having an increase in any kind of economic activity regarding, like global supply chains, go through having more clean and enough energy. And this is not going to happen unless we see more private investment in terms of the generation of this energy, which is legally possible in Mexico. But it is not legally possible to have private investment in, like the transmission or the distribution of this energy. So we actually need the state to focus on those areas that are their only job, which are transmission and distribution. And I believe both of the top candidates in Mexico right now are pretty aware that we need to have this investment. The main difference might be in how we see the investment of the private sector within the production of energy. And I've heard of the Claudia Sheinbaum team that they are open to public-private associations, which are good in a sense that they mean that they are more open than the current administration, of not only being respectful to previous trade agreements, but also to contracts and so on. But I believe we have the guarantee that the Sochi administration might be also very respectful of those contracts and agreements. So I would focus my intention or my my focus in the energy sector. Of course, in logistics might be important to have an improvement. Of course, we need to have security on the private property of the investment in Mexico, which right now this week you've heard in the Senate that Senator Kane asked Secretary of State Blinken why Mexico would appropriate the government of Mexico would, just go within Vulcan Materials property and take over this private property. And I believe this is something that needs to be addressed, because this is something that is very basic for any kind of trade to happen within the next administration, even though it could be Claudia Sheinbaum's administration.
Thank you, Sophia. And now we're going to get one question we got from the audience. I agree with Ciro. Immigration is a big issue, and President Biden or President Trump will they continue with the pressure on Mexico? What are the panelists' thoughts on this topic? And since we're running a long time, I'll give you guys 1 minute each to answer this. And sorry for being abrupt, but that we're running out of time. Thank you.
So I don't know if Ciro wants to start.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, it will be part of the bilateral relationship for years. I think it will be quite different if it's Trump or if it's Biden. Trump has said that he's going to expel a lot of people in Mexico. It will be to Mexico, sorry. It will be a very big problem to Mexico, because it means talking again about the population. What will happen with Mexico if it starts to receive a lot of older people that is still working in the United States and go to Mexico without savings, without house, even without work? It will be a new pressure on Mexican economy and on Mexican families, I think. It will be not just a problem in United States, it will be a problem to Mexico also. And I think In Mexico, we have a problem with the institutions and the bodies that work with the migration, the migrants. The problem last year in one station with fire, 40 people dying for the responsibility of the migrant agency is other problem. But I think we should prepare to face the worst scenario, and the worst scenario is Trump in the White House again.
Thank you, Ciro. And I'm sorry, guys, but that is all the time we have. This has been a great panel. I'm sure a lot of our listeners really enjoyed this. We want to thank you guys, Alejandra, Sofia, Ciro. Thank you very much for joining me in this very interesting panel. And I'm going to just mention a little housekeeping here. Reminder: the Mexican elections are June 2nd. You can vote online if you are registered to do so between now through June 2nd. I've already done my civic duty and voted online. If you're a Mexican expat or no one and want to vote, you can visit the National Electoral Institute website, get more information on how and where to vote. Chamber events, we've got our Sacramento delegation September 17th and the 18th, and our Mexico City delegation October 20th and the 23rd. Hope you can join us. You can still register for Sacramento between now and June 28th. A medium will be adding that registration link if she hasn't already. So to all of you, we are finishing right on time. Thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you. And make sure everybody has to get out and vote. Historic elections. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.